Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for this opportunity to make my maiden speech in this important debate on jobs and unemployment. I take my seat in the shadow of three eminent predecessors, all of whom have been gracious enough, with some little help from the Boundary Commission, to cede portions of their constituencies to the new Mid Norfolk. The Honourable Member for Broadland, who represented Mid Norfolk with great distinction, the Honourable Member for South Norfolk, and the former Honourable Member for South West Norfolk, all of whom I know are held in the highest esteem both locally and in this House. Now, Mr. Speaker, you're no doubt asking, where is Mid Norfolk? Its boundaries have baffled many of its constituents since being redrawn. Centred on Dereham, the ancient heart of Norfolk, it includes the three market towns of Attleborough, Watton and Wymondham, at 110 charming villages. With your permission, I'd like to take the House on a quick tour, a 130-mile tour. I had the great pleasure to make my bicycle in stages over the last 3 years, in the spirit of past parliamentarians, most famously William Cobbett on horseback, and more latterly the Honourable Member for Penrith and the Borders on foot, following the instruction of the former member for Chingford, and more recently the example of my right honourable friend the Prime Minister, perhaps the only time they've agreed, I opted to go by bike. We start at the Crown in Colkirk, the northernmost point, only a few furlongs south of the magnificent Fakenham racecourse, and pass through Beeston, home of the new microbrewery, and the excellent Worth the Wait ale. I hope the House might feel it's worthy of a glass after my maiden speech. Dereham, the capital, which received its charter in the 16th century. Swanton Morley, the home of the Light Dragoons, who I know the House will want to thank for their brave service for our country. Hingham, the home of Abraham Lincoln's family and the relaunched Lotus motor racing team. Wymondham, with its famous abbey, crucible of Robert Kett's rebellion, and home to Wymondham College, a rare state boarding school, and Wymondham High, two of the top state schools in the country. Attleborough, home of Banham Poultry, our largest local business, and Liftshare, the world's fastest growing car share company, set up in a former turkey shed by a local entrepreneur. And Watton, heart of the Wayland Valley and home of the famous horse fair. Eschewing the metropolitanism of Norwich, Fakenham, Thetford and Swaffham, Mr. Speaker, which guard its perimeter, Mid Norfolk is the rural core of this most rural and historic of counties. A county, I need hardly remind the House, has given us our first Prime Minister in Sir Robert Walpole, our greatest military hero in Horatio Nelson, and the seeds of the agricultural and therefore industrial revolution, courtesy of Cook of Holcombe and Turnip Townsend. Now, the turnip, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is a vegetable which has, of course, had a tricky press of late, but it is, I assure you, held in the very highest esteem in Norfolk. But my constituency has come of late to feel increasingly marginalised, and tackling that sense of marginalisation to unlock the talents and aspirations of its people are and will remain the central theme of my work as its MP. Mid Norfolk, Mr. Speaker, feels marginalised from the decision-making process and too often forced to change in ways its people neither chose nor like. The small, local, voluntary and rural is all too often crowded out by the big, national, professional and urban. As was reported this week, rural Britain has been especially hard hit by unemployment in this recession, and my constituency has pockets of rural deprivation which are often hidden and invisible to the passer-by, and pensioner poverty can be especially invisible. Post offices, pubs and village shops have closed, whilst more and more people are forced to commute increasing distances from mass housing estates forced on our market towns and councils. In my 3-year candidacy, Mr. Speaker, I've insisted on another way. Members opposite might call it a third way. We call it the Norfolk way, a vision of a vibrant rural society based on a renaissance of rural enterprise, smaller pockets of mixed housing spread more fairly and sustainably, fast-growing small businesses and jobs back in our villages and towns, less commuting, and a richer mix of ages and blue and white-collar jobs in active, real communities. Some may ask, where, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are these new jobs and businesses to come from? Well, let me tell you. Situated between Norwich and Cambridge, two of the world's leading centres of scientific research and innovation in food, biomedicine and the clean technologies that my honourable friend spoke of earlier, so vital to the global challenges we face, Mid Norfolk is perfectly positioned to become a hub of entrepreneurial activity and new jobs. With the world-leading John Innes Centre and the Institute of Food Research, world-class agriculture, high-tech engineering along the A11 corridor, we can lead in those new economic sectors on which we will increasingly depend. And as someone who came to politics after a 15-year career in creating new technology businesses, this is an area in which I hope to be able to put my experience to good use. But this revolution can't happen without two essential things: new models of investment in infrastructure, the A11, rural broadband and rail links, and some local leadership. The stale post-war model of statist centralisation and dependence on the Whitehall handout has failed Norfolk and needs replacing if we are to have a sustainable recovery. But, Mr. Speaker, the benefits of this empowerment and liberalism will not just be economic. Rural Britain is, I believe, the repository of some important virtues our modern culture has neglected: a deep belief in self-help and responsibility, an insistence that everybody in a community has a role, and the rejection of a shallow media culture's obsession with celebrity, a love of the small, the different and the local. These are qualities, Mr. Speaker, that are deeply embedded in the English character. The people of Mid Norfolk sent me here to speak up for them, so I shall. My constituents, proud of these values, have found themselves increasingly powerless in the face of a tidal wave of legislation and big government from Europe, Whitehall and unaccountable regional quangos. And many worry that our culture has been hijacked by an increasingly intolerant, politically correct, anything-goes multiculturalism, which seems to have too little respect for the longer traditions of tolerance, personal freedom and responsibility embedded in our traditional heritage. By pumping the bellows of local empowerment, I believe we can reignite the embers of a culture which can and should be allowed to exist alongside metropolitan Britain to mutual benefit. At the heart of this manifesto is a big idea, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that citizenship is not forged through the dependence on the state espoused by New Labour and its philosopher king, Anthony Giddens, but by the empowering act of the state granting responsibility to its citizens. And that is the central idea which has brought me into politics as a Conservative, and which I'm delighted is once again the idea at the heart of modern conservatism and this coalition. In concluding, Mr. Speaker, I hope the House might allow me to close on a personal note. As no doubt for all honourable members, taking my seat in this great House is the culmination of a long journey and a lifetime's dream. I can recall very clearly when that seed was sown, coming here on a school trip, aged 12, inspired by childhood stories of my great-uncle Gladstone. But as the child of a broken and at that time unhappy home, I recall seeing the worn edges of the dispatch box and being struck by a deeply reassuring idea that whoever and wherever you are in our country, there is a place where the nation takes responsibility for its affairs, a place where your problem matters, a place here for you, whoever you are. And I still believe there's no greater honour than to be sent here by a constituency to serve. And I believe the public want to believe that too, and want this new Parliament to raise aloft the standard of a politics of which we can all be proud. I thank the people of Mid Norfolk for the chance to be part of that, and I thank the House for its patience this evening.